I'm impressed that you guys braved the weather to show up tonight when there's a million things you could be doing, and yet you're choosing to be here. So just for that, I'm grateful. Thank you. Maybe probably be good if I gave you a little background of myself. So tomorrow, February 13th, is my 30-year anniversary as a conservation technician at Sauk County. Derek was an intern of ours many years back. And you would think it'd be boring doing the same thing for 30 years, but I still look forward to coming to work, and had my annual review yesterday, and I didn't get fired, so I have another year to go, hopefully. So hopefully keep the streak going. But yeah, so originally I went to school in Point, spent a lot of time at Belts, spent a lot of time fishing walleyes along the river here. But before that, I went to high school in Antigo. So, Antigo Red Robins, we played Wausau, we played all these schools here, Spash, and all the different sports. And so very familiar with the area, and it's got a special place for me because of my background. And my folks live in Boulder, so I'm up here quite a bit. So when they asked me to come and speak, I jumped at it. But please ignore what I have to say, because you too have heard this before. Anyways, for those that maybe have not. So, we would love to just take you back a little bit, just kind of set the stage, so to speak. So if you would just go back 300 years or so, a lot of our landscape looks similar to this, especially there's a line where it's probably northern forest, a lot of wooded ground, but further down by me for sure, it looked a lot like this. But as you look at the prairie region, we're right on the edge of it up here. So what dominated the landscape are, you can see that blue grasses here, big blue stem, and there are a bunch of other native species, prairie, woodland, savanna mix species that were there. But in the process of that, those species had intense root systems, and those roots would go, well, if that's the top, if the ceiling is level of the ground, top of the ground of our earth, the roots would be down this far. So they were intense, 10 to 15 feet into the ground. And so no matter what Mother Nature threw at it, it might struggle, but most of the time it survived it because the root systems were so intense. So droughts, fires, floods, it didn't matter. It just weathered a lot of storms. And so during that time, there's fauna everywhere. And it's the things that you can see, the birds, the wolves, wouldn't be cattle, would be bison, elk herds, deer herds, antelope, and when you went further south, that's what would dominate the landscape. And that's what would go through and eat this, rotational graze this stuff, and then move on to greener pastures. And so, what kept them herded up were the wolves that you see up there, the predators that would nip at their heels and keep them herded up and keep them moving, basically, too. And so, why grazing works so well, I think it's important to kind of understand this, because this is why grazing works so well, because it's been going on for eons before we humans started picking it up. But growing corn and growing beans, that hasn't been around for that long, right? But this has been around for a long time. So a lot of our soils, like if you look right there over to the left there, the mollisols are called. That just means really dark, deep topsoil. It evolved under this kind of a system. And so it built up our soils, and a lot of that dark stuff that you're seeing there, that's carbon that would be in the atmosphere, but it's now soaked into the ground and in the form of humus, and it's stable for years and years and years. And also, stream bank erosion, sure, it existed, but a lot of the banks were pretty well seeded over, covered over with good vegetation. see if I can move this along here. I wonder if it'd be easier for you to move it. You think so? Yeah. It's kind of stuck. Okay. There we go. So, you know, as some of you probably have heard from Grandpa, great grandpa, talk about what was here just not that long ago, really, in the, as far as like geologically speaking and environmentally speaking, it's not that long ago that we had a thriving dairy industry, and we had a lot of the farms had beef, poultry, pigs, chickens. There was a diversity of cropping system and a diversity of animals, and guess what? It was mostly grass-based because it was cheaper to grow animals and to have a farm that way. The inputs, people just didn't have the kind of money for the inputs. And also, like, if you look at our planting systems, what we planted on our soils is pretty diverse. Got an oat field, a grassy hay field, we had alfalfa, a little bit of corn, very minimal beans, some wheat, some pasture, but it was a very diverse system of agriculture. And this is kind of what our farms look like today, and especially down by Sauk. You see it up here too. Corn is king. I think we all know that. I mean, what's that country music song? I think even Alabama has like a song about how great the corn is, or there's that old play, Oklahoma. You know, was it the corn is as high as an elephant's eye? I mean, corn rules, and I think we all know that. And so, and guess what? It really rules now. And this is kind of the diversity of the farms. Remember, I was telling you before, the diversity of plants, diversity of animals. We just don't see that anymore. This is kind of what our farms have become as a majority. So this is an interesting graph because it kind of really shows you where our prairies were, and as a result of that, where our plants are, where our farms are. So obviously we're up here. We're right on the edge of this dark prairie, but this is also where a percent of our land, most of our crops are grown right in this prairie region. It's not a coincidence. And remember, those prairies created that deep, dark topsoil, the mollisol that I showed you earlier, and that's where we plant our crops. Well, nothing new for a lot of you. Also, agriculture definitely has its impacts on the environment. This was in the Dust Bowl era in the 30s. Do we still have this today? Exactly. So like I thought we were past this. This is 2025 and we're still here. And so obviously we got to change. Something has to change. I just think, and I'm slightly biased, but data is pretty clear that like maybe more lands into permanent agriculture, permanent permaculture, grasslands. This didn't happen before we started, really changing the land use. And, the consequences are pretty far. So a few summers ago now, I have a couple of boys. We went down to New Orleans for a family vacation. It was a long drive, and it was 95 degrees. It was hot. But while we were down there, I'm like, I would love to see this dead zone. That's the yellow area. That I keep reading about, and I want to see for myself how real it is. So we got there. There was a park nearby, and I got out. We kind of waited in this area here, and it's dead. I mean, I just wanted to, like, in an area that should be teeming with life, I didn't see anything. I didn't even see minnows nipping at your feet or like swimming away. I saw nothing. And so, like, okay, it's pretty real. And a lot of that, and I ran into a shrimper while we were there, and so how's it going? Well, and he was telling me, giving me the ropes. Well, it used to be we get in our boats and within a half hour we were shrimping. Now we go 3 or 4 hours before we start shrimping because it just, there's nothing there. And a lot of that is coming from us up here in the Midwest, right through the Mississippi to Missouri, and that prime ag land that I showed you earlier, it's feeding into there. So something's got to change. And this is, you guys, yeah, down by us, we have slopes. It's the unglaciated region. And what's supposed to, just to give you an idea, what it's supposed to look like, there's a stream, right? The stream bank is supposed to be right about here. That's all sediment from upstream that's washed into our floodplains. The stream doesn't have a floodplain. It's supposed to have a floodplain. It's supposed to kind of go like this, go up in this area, maybe about 1.5 feet, 2 feet, big floodplain, up another terrace, another big floodplain, and then finally up. Well, all those floodplains are filled in with sediment. And you hear stories of guys pounding fence posts in, and then they found another fence post in on top of where the other fence post was, and then another one. So 3 deep, a fence post, that's just how much sediment has washed into our waterways. And so what the stream tries to do is, I need to recreate my floodplain. And so it meanders back and forth and washes it away. In the process of doing that, all the sediment that has fertilizers and everything with it is washing and clogging up waterways. And so these are some of the consequences. A lot of you probably know this already. So this is just one of the answers, in my opinion, of addressing some of those environmental issues that we just discussed. And a lot of you know what managed grazing is. Just keep the animals moving, keep the grass growing, let the land rest, and bring them back. Lawn mow with animals, but with a longer interval of them. So, like I mentioned to you before, grazing works because it's been here for so long that the soils have evolved with grazing, and the plants have evolved with grazing, and the wildlife underground has evolved with grazing. And so when we introduce ruminants back in, like the bison again, to mimic the bison, the system just flourishes. It seems to work really well, and it addresses a lot of those other environmental things that I showed earlier. Yeah, here they are. And that's just one of them. Like by us, we had elk herds by the hundreds that would come through too. And by the way, the bison and the elk, they left Wisconsin, just so you know. And so that's why it's challenging for us, so that we're not imitating nature there as well, I would say. I mean, because these animals left. But obviously that was a different time. We're doing the best we can to imitate what was here. And they don't run free either. We have fences and roads and the like. And so just very simple concept of what grazing is. So whenever you hear the word set stock grazing, that just means you open up the pasture and you let them go. For the season, when you run out of pasture, they start bellaring, you bring them feed, and it's costing you lots of money in the process. But with rotational grazing, you might split that up into 30 different paddocks instead of one big one. And in the process of that, you just can go for a long time. Yep, we're good. So we have this rainfall simulator. Probably a lot of you have seen this in action. Our county was one of the first ones to buy it. I used to run it quite a bit. And we actually go out and cut chunks of land out of different land uses. So bare soil, an annual pasture, bare, it could be like slight residue or overgrazed pasture or like well-managed pasture. We try to get 4 or 5 different things, and then that middle piece right there is a pole that water comes out at the top. there's a sprinkler out there. And we're putting on, it's like a inch of rain in, I don't know, 10 minutes or something. Like, it's like a big downpour. And we want to see how the systems react. And what's really cool about it, so there's catchment basins, there's catchment containers in the front, and that's catching runoff. But the big thing is there are containers underneath the pans that catches infiltration. And no secret, as you would expect, you know, where we have bare soil, and there's a lot of bare soil yet. For conservationists like myself, it's hard to take seeing so much of our soil bare still in 2025. You know, no-till is nothing new. It's been around for a long time, but we do an annual survey in Sauk County. We've done it for the last 20 years or so now, and only 30% of our lands are actually no-till. The other 70% is no-till. And it's almost like, have we not heard of no-till? It costs money to pass over the land multiple times. You just go through once. And no-till, it seems pretty simple, but old habits are hard to break. So like this bare soil thing is common. You just look around. When you drive, well, you can't see it today. But when the snow melts, drive around and you'll just start to pay attention to the bare soil and think of this photo. Even on flat ground, there is soil movement and it can be measured, and it has been measured. So anyway, lots of runoff, carrying with it soils that clog up our lakes and waterways, greens them up. And obviously a little bit of residue causes the same, but I just want to take your attention to this very minimal runoff in a well-managed system. And the little bit of runoff that is there, look how clear the water is. And a lot of infiltration. Most of the water is actually recharging at the groundwater. And what's ending up down there is not atrazine and a bunch of fertilizer. It's water mostly. It's just really good for grassland birds. Just kind of, I wanted to just show some examples of some of the layouts and some of the projects that I've been a part of, that I've laid out in Sauk County over the last few years. This is a big dairy grazing one. If you're noticing the double lines, here's the central barn, but obviously they're being milked twice a day, so they have to get back to the barn. So that's kind of the layout. This is generally how we do it, just long strips, and then we subdivide from there. And we have water lines, you know, all the way through this too. So oftentimes by us, again, corn is king, and it won't be long. And probably a couple of weeks ago when we had that melting event, this is what our waterways look like. This is what was running into our Bearwood River and our streams. And probably the Lake DeBays and the Lake Wisconsin by me and the Wisconsin River, it's looking a lot like this after our heavy rains or during our melts. We have too much bare soil. Okay. So we usually come in with, I have a 7-way mix that I use. It's meadow fescue, orchard grass, perennial ryegrass, and vestibuloleum. And then we usually incorporate in some legumes too, some red clover, white clover, and a little bit of alfalfa. But you know, Mother Nature fills in another 20 species, you know, things that we might consider weeds. And some of you probably know, but like you put ragweed out there, giant ragweed, the animals love it. We think it's a weed, but they don't. And so, and in this situation, this was one of my projects too. We just no-tilled in all that. You can see the corn residue here. We have slopes to deal with, and so we're pretty careful about that. And also, by the time we get to more rotational grazing, our landowners are aware of like a lot of the soil health principles, you know, like keep the soil covered, minimize disturbance, add diversity, incorporate animals. those are some of the big ones. And so, yeah, go ahead. So we'll cover it, and then we'll go through its fencing. And it's a perimeter fence, and it's interior fence. Generally, the interior fence for cattle are one strand. Some people get a little bit uptight about like, well, but the calves are disappearing, but the calves always come back to mom. So keep it simple. I just have one strand. That's what we found to be the easiest. And then our job then too is like lay water lines, but under the fences so that they're not in the way. And every 200 feet or so, we have these quick disconnect couplers, and you attach a garden hose right here to it, open the valve that then goes to a demand valve up there, a flow valve. And that's how we bring water to the cattle. And then as far as like our predator, our wolf, this is the wolf. That's what that does. It herds them. They know if they touch that, it hurts. And they test it a couple of times and they don't anymore. So every time they see that, even sometimes when the power is off, they don't know it right away and they won't touch it. And so this is kind of how we're trying to imitate what was here, what Mother Nature provided. This is the system. And just some examples. It's just cool to see green grass in the middle of winter during a snowstorm. And so I have a lot of pictures in here of just green grass to get us back in that mindset. This is the dairy herd from that pasture that I showed you earlier. And this, yep, and here's another one. Go back one. You keep going. So this is another one of my projects, and this one was kind of a diverse, it's the same landowner, but they have a dairy herd and they have a beef herd, and we can cross the road right here and keep going if we need to. But there's the double lanes scattered throughout here for the dairy herd that need to go back to the barn every day. And out here, our beef herd just would zigzag their way through and then cross the road here and come all the way through and then come right back again. So that's kind of how a lot of that's laid out. So this is that farm on the ground. We didn't surface the lanes. We didn't have that many animals. They weren't milking that often. And I didn't want to spend the money yet until we found out if there was a problem. And so, and this part, they're here once every 30 days. And so we didn't bother surfacing it. So don't rush to surface every lane that you choose to put one in. And here is animals out here. It's a little, this one's a little bit, there we go. And you can see some of it's headed out. It got ahead of them. They were in specialty cheeses, so they weren't chasing production so much, more the quality. They're getting money that way. And this is another one of my dairy heifers. It's getting back to the barn. Here's the lane. Keep going. And we started really putting these signs out. And actually, right now, my dad's fixing up our signs because I noticed this is more to advertise. For those that are not used to this system, it looks messy. Like, oh my goodness, I need clean cornrows. Weedless, same height, everything perfect. Just like our lawns. I mean, that's what we're trying to do with our lawns. And we try to do the same thing out there. So then you take that mindset and you put it towards a grazing setup. But nature is not neat and clean and pretty. Right? She doesn't have like perfectly straight rows or lines. It doesn't usually happen that way. And so like, I was noticing that like some of our, I think I could just overhear like, oh, that's so messy. I'd never want that on my farm. Or they go, what's the matter with them? Why don't they take care of it? It's like, so I was talking to our staff and I said, you know, we need to let people know that, no, we want this. This is actually intentional. And I'm like, well, no better way to do it than to put up a sign. And so we're next to the Dells. So we contacted some of the Dells folks and said, hey, what kind of signs seem to catch the human eye? Well, they said red, white, Yellow. Guess what we chose? So that's why we came up with that color. It wasn't just out of the blue. We used their recommendation. So, but what was happening? What's been happening? I've noticed is that grass is growing up over it, and it's hard to get in there to mow. And so actually, what my dad's doing now is he's cutting off a leg, putting in an extra new channel here, drill a couple of holes. We're gonna attach it to a post. Then it's out of the way, and you can mow around it, and it's high. And so to really kind of show it off, and we're making more signs too. And that's catching people's attention. It's like, oh, what is that all about? And it's like, okay, well, let me call. And now people are actually coming to us now for grazing, which is kind of nice. I foresee that happening here with the group. This is how it starts. The group was tiny when we maybe had 4 or 5 people to begin with. And now we regularly get 50 to 60 people show up for our pasture walk. So it just takes somebody organizing it, like Golden Sands and Rachel, Derek and company. Yep, go ahead. This is another one of my grazing setups. So this was for dairy heifer. The cows are on this side, and the heifers are hanging out. You're just kind of going through that whole area. It's just more challenging. Look at that. There's no square anything. Everything is crooked over by us. And so it's challenging as for people like myself who set these up. It's a little bit more challenging than how I hear. So this is from that. These are his heifers, and he just kind of makeshift mineral feeder that he pulls behind his mule. Just cut some barrels in half and hook them together with some washers and bolts, and off we went. Okay. And really high class, very expensive watering trough that he has there. Cut a 50-gallon drum in half and cut a hole to handle it, and 12 valves in there. Cost him nothing. And one thing the grazing will do that I see over and over again is the pollinators really come back to it. Yes, it's not probably as diverse as what we had, again, native prairies. Sometimes those of us who do this kind of work, sometimes we argue amongst each other. I think it's unnecessary. Honestly, we're just splitting hairs. About like, well, we need a lot more native stuff because there's more flowers and it's more, yeah, I know. But like, it's more important to put something like this in than to have more corn and beans on the landscape. This is a move in the right direction. And so, and I personally see it. I mean, there are times you walk through that pasture and you just hear the buzzing. They're not after you. You just hear them buzzing like crazy. Also, one of my producers had a cool moment where it was in September, must have been a later migration or something, but the monarchs descended on his pasture, and there were hundreds of them all over. And so if you build it, they will come type of thing, and they really do. The meadowlarks will come back, those songs, bobolinks will come back. We have a lot of bobolinks. They're really, really cool. And it's cool to watch farmers get connected again with the land. When you're always on machinery, that's all you hear. That's all you hear. But when you're grazing and you're walking out, you hear your footsteps, you hear the bees buzzing, and you hear the meadowlark singing, and you realize maybe this is why I do what I do. So I don't know. That's off the beaten path a little bit, but really, I do think that's real, and that's what keeps you motivated and going when it comes to grazing. Yeah, look at here. Yeah, just look at the plethora of vegetation, and most of that we didn't even plant. It came on its own, but the clovers we planted. And some of the grasses. But you can just see there are weeds, what we call weeds, scattered throughout there. But again, the animals don't seem to care what we define as weeds. They'll just eat what they want. Okay. So just for perspective standpoint, I like putting this together. So like in our county, so for the last 8 years or so, you know, I would say for the first 20 years of my career, maybe we averaged 0 to 5 acres in their managed grazing. And in about 2016, 2017, I got some help from good mentors about like running the financials. And it's kind of what today is about, running the finances. And I thought, okay, well, let me share this with folks that I meet. And we went that first year, we started using numbers to kind of help convince people to grass. We went from, again, 0 to 5 acres to, it was like 500 acres that first year. Like, okay, we must be onto something here. Because I mean, up to that point, it's like, you should graze because it's good for the environment. Right. Does it pay the bills? I don't know, but it's really good for the environment and it's good for a lot of things. So, and that wasn't going anywhere. I mean, most of us in the environmental field, that's the stuff we think of, but we're forgetting like the nuts and bolts, finances. And that's what you guys are getting into here. And so like the very following year, I think it went up to 700 acres. And then we had 400 acres. We've been averaging about 400 to 500 acres of conversions every year now since 2017. We're about 5,000 acres. It's a 5,032 to be exact right now. But so what does that mean? That's great, but what does that mean actually? Well, when we run through the numbers, it's about 54,000 tons of soil we keep out of our streams every year. And so, but then the next question would be like, yeah, right. Like, I don't see 54,000 tons. It's called a stream. It flushes it out when it settles on the floodplain, like I talked about. And so it just gets flushed through and flushed and flushed and flushed until you get to the dead zone, like that I showed you earlier. So like just for fun, I'm like, okay, you get a dump truck, you get about 12. Well, I mean, we can fit, I figured 12 cubic yards or something like that in a dump truck. And you line them up end to end, and I figured a dump truck was about 27 feet. I measured a bunch of dump trucks to make sure. And so you line them up end to end, there's 4,500. It's about 23 miles of soil that we keep out of our local streams. Now remember, it's every year, not just one and done, it's every year. Because if it stays in the land use that it was in, corn and soybeans, it would continue to erode. And it only takes like the thickness of a dime. That's what a ton is per acre of soil. But it's hardly perceptible to the eye. Okay, we usually see the gullies, right? That's what's visible to our eyes. We're talking about sheet and rill erosion coming off 1 dime thickness at a time. And so that's only part of the story. We're reducing the runoff significantly. And in doing that, we reduce the volume of soil that's being carried by the runoff. And we're connecting the water cycle. So oftentimes what's happening now is our water cycle is broken. How it's supposed to happen is we get evaporation, we get condensation, we get rainfall. I think, what did I figure? I read some stuff and it was talking about like back 300 years, like I described earlier, like 90% of that rain went into the ground and 10% ran off. Now it's like, I don't know, 60% actually runs off and the other 40% infiltrates. So we've just flipped it around altogether. And so putting it into grass kind of reconnects our water system, gets it working again. So to what extent? Well, did some figuring and talked to some engineers like, okay, change land use. What can we expect, as far as infiltration based on the land use that's out here? And we figured about 70,000 gallons per acre. It would sound like maybe much, but it adds up over 5,000 acres. And so it ended up being about 350 million gallons of water. And I did some math and figured out like how many gallons we could fit in the back of a dump truck. And well, it's about 146,000 dump trucks, 748 miles long. And if you line it up, well, Baraboo to Bismarck, North Dakota. That's how, go to the next one, because there. That's how many dump truck full of water we're now infiltrating, and it's not running up. That's just on 5,000 acres. You can quickly see that, like, why we have water quality problems, why our waterways are the way they are. I mean, that little bit of improvement made that much of a difference. Imagine. So I did the quick math. We had our GrassWorks conference, and usually that gets you all motivated and jacked up to keep going. You know, let's let go. And so I thought, okay, about 5,000 acres. What percent of our landscape is that in Sauk County? 2.2%. Like, oh, a long way to go. And part of that's like, okay, well, we have room to grow. You know, we have a lot of potential. But sometimes you get some pushback from our row crop producers, like, oh my goodness, you're putting all this land in the grass. Whoa, we need land for corn. You got 98%. I don't think you have to worry so much. So my goal for our county is 10%. Let's get to 10%. Well, that's 22,000 acres in the grass. It's still just 10%. So you folks you're on the doorsteps of like growing something and catching up to where we're at this point. And we're trying to catch up to Marathon County, who has like a head start on all of us. They were onto this stuff a little bit earlier. And in doing all that, it's more profitable. I'll just run through some numbers later. And you're part of the solution. You're helping at that point. So you've all been to Lake the Bay, and you've seen the Wisconsin River. Whenever it's dammed up, it looks pretty green, right? I used to fish Lake Wisconsin all the time, all summer long, and I quit because it would look like this by mid-July-ish. And it was just disgusting. My boat's covered in it. My fishing line is covered in it. I also knew what went into it. And so like, I didn't want to eat the fish anymore after a while. And so, but it's starting up here and how we manage the landscape. And so, with just converting 5,000 acres to grass, well-managed pasture, we're keeping about 45,000 pounds of phosphorus from entering our streams and lakes. It doesn't sound like much, maybe, but like 1 pound of phosphorus is the big limiting factor when it comes to freshwater systems. In saltwater, nitrogen is the big one. But in our area in freshwater, nitrogen obviously matters too, but phosphorus is the big one. So like 1 pound of phosphorus will green up a 1 acre lake that's 10 feet deep, just 1 pound. It's pretty powerful. And so I thought, well, how many acre lake would this be? 45,000 acres. I'm like, well, how big is Lake the Bay? About 7,000 acres. Well, that's 7 Lake the Bays, 10 feet deep. Every year, we're dumping in. But Lake the Bay flushes it downstream, and it ends up depositing in the Gulf of Mexico. And so that's 2.2% of our land, of ag land. I'm talking about just our ag land in Sauk County. And here's the impact of that. Imagine if we could get to 10%. And that's what keeps me going. And that's what I'm hoping drives all of us into doing this. Okay. And we organize a lot of pasture walks. In the beginning, I think I had 1 or 2 pasture walks, and we had 5 or 6 people show up, and that's good enough for me. I mean, I didn't go I went into conservation field, not public stuff like this. This makes me nervous, and didn't really want to be a part of it, but I realized that I was going to have to get over that if I wanted the grazing thing to move forward. So started with 1 or 2, had just a few, got more comfortable, and like I said, in year 7 or 8 here, we're getting quite a bit of following now. A lot of people excited about it, yeah.
What's all the corn doing in your pasture?
So this person was experimenting. So he had winter bale grazed here. So set up bales and grazed here. And some of it had some bare spots, so he interseeded. This is a cover crop mix. that had corn with it, sorghum and corn thrown in. So we were showing that off during the pasture walk here. It's quite a diverse group of people too. It's not hardcore farmers, it's retired folks who want to do something else. It's folks who have been doing it for a while. He's a crop consultant and he's here. There's Compare Financial, ag lender who's here. We've got Amish community here too. But it's a kind of a really a diverse array of folks that show up at these. And that day too, we were talking about cattle handling facilities. So we try to have some sort of a theme, whether it's genetics, cattle handling, grass, water, whatever it is. The theme this day was actually cattle handling. So he was herding us through the chute to simulate what it would be like. Yeah, we have young folks and we try to shut the fence off so that they're not getting shocked, but they touch it once and they learn not to touch the fence. And they're usually okay with that. So, yep. And so here on this day, he's our local plumber and he helps a lot with installing our water lines, and also getting the wells right, getting the pressure tanks situated. So he was the feature of the day, the plumber and the watering systems. Okay. So we're here to kick off a farm finance series, but I had to lay the groundwork first before I just jumped into this. And so the numbers vary depending on the farm. And I have run the numbers a million times with tons of different farmers. And it varies some. And I'm just using like today's dollars here. And it seems as though like roughly about $700 an acre is what the expense is. Some folks it's 900 and some folks it's 500. But 700 seems to be right in that ballpark. And if I just thought, oh, look, that's how much it costs per acre to grow corn. I'm using corn because corn is king, and we know that. And so when we talk about gross revenue, I just took 175 bushel. I don't know what the rates are here, but that's actually pretty good even by us. We average about 150, but I gave it a bit of a bump there, 175, 425. You forward contracted today, it's about close to that. So about 743, 745-ish. So whenever I run these numbers with producers for corn, we're averaging between $0 and $150 an acre profit-wise. So if we just split the difference, then it's about 75. I think most people would, if you've ever planted corn, it's not that profitable. And this is pretty close. And so again, give or take a little bit. So if we so how much of our gross do we get to keep when we're planting corn? It's about 10%, roughly. If you go to financial planning courses like the ones that are really in depth, they go, this number needs to be closer to 40% or higher. That's the goal. We're at 10%. So guess what? It's the Walmart model. We've got to rent more land so that a bunch of 10%, we make enough then. And so neighbors fighting with each other for land. I know like 30 years ago when I first started, I remember old ladies like baking pies to try to beg somebody to rent their land. Like, just rent my land. You don't even have to pay me. I'll give you some cakes or something like that. I'll bake some pies for you. Like, just rent my land. You pay me $10 an acre, we're good. Not anymore. Now it's like, it's cutthroat out there. It's hard to find land, and there's a lot of secret under the table stuff going on. It splits up families. That's because we're right here. We're stuck low, just not making much. But we have to keep expanding. So I would just ask you, where did the money go? You can fill in the blanks. Okay. So when it comes to grazing it, so if you're planting corn, you roughly have about two options, right? It's organic corn, which is pretty profitable, or it's just commodity standard corn, which is what I'm working on, was what the numbers that I was showing you earlier. If you're grazing, boy, the diversity and the options are plentiful. And these are just some of them. You can do more. I mean, how many of these are you doing on your farm, Rachel?
Well, I guess finish to finish. But within the room, there's a lot.
There's a lot of different, yeah. So there's a lot of ways you can make money on pasture, I guess was the point of this slide, versus say row crop. Right? So I just picked two of them. Simple, easy. The cow calf to finish is a lot more complicated. I've run those numbers too. It's just we don't have enough time to cover that. So I'm just picking a stocker enterprise. All that means is you're buying animals in the spring at about 500 pounds-ish, and you put 200 to 300 pounds on, and you sell them in October-ish, give or take. And so guess what? To buy an animal these days in the spring, 500 pounds, it's like 1,800 bucks. There was a time it was like 600 bucks, just to give you an idea. It's $1,800. So what that drives your expense per acre up quite a bit. $2,838 an acre. I just kind of ran through some basic figures on a couple of producers that I work with. And the gross revenue, about $3,360. Again, looking at today's numbers at our livestock auction barns by me. Okay. So the average profit is about 500 bucks an acre-ish. So we do the same math, and we up it from 10% to 16%. Well, we're getting closer to that higher 40% number. It's better. It's almost twice as better. It's not always just what you gross, it's what you take home. That's what you should be bragging about. It's what is this number saying? That's what you should be bragging about. Again, these are not exact figures, but it's just giving you an idea, like corn and soybeans are down here, and the grazing enterprises are definitely better. Yeah.
I went to the Ag Outlook Forum held by the UW Economics Department about a month ago, and with projections of corn at $3.90 a bushel and beans at $10, the average Wisconsin is looking at a negative margin for $1 per bushel of corn and $2.40 for beans looking into next year.
And so, like, if you look at, just for fun ones, as I was digging into the grazing numbers and trying to convince people to go to grass using finances, I looked at corn prices from the 60s till now, and what you notice was like it went whoop, and down and whoop. And so, like, about every 10 years, you get a spike. The rest of the time, you're just making just cash flow, breaking even or losing some money, and then you get a $7 corn, and then down we go again. But it wasn't that long ago we had $7 corn. This is a couple of years ago. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, and here we're down to 4 again. And so then, just for fun, like, oh, what does that come out to? How much are you getting to keep? Well, about 16%. Okay, go. So I did one for custom grazing. That's where you're babysitting other people's animals and getting paid for it. That's really what custom grazing is. And guess what? The market is there for it. Man, I never thought so. About 4 years ago, we really poked into this a little bit more. And there has not been one farmer that I've worked with, and we've had quite a bit, that like went into custom grazing, put an ad out, Facebook Marketplace, and a few other like places on Facebook, or there are some places online, and I have a list of them. But like, there is not one farmer that I work with that haven't found somebody whose animals are coming to their farm and they're babysitting their animals. Usually it happens within 2 days. Last year, one of my landowners, I don't know, they dropped the ball a little bit. I'm like, you got to try to find someone in January, February, just to make sure. Well, they didn't start looking for someone until late April. I'm like, oh, good luck finding it. They put the ad out. Before the day was over, they had 10 offers. they're like, it was just all we could do to keep up. Like if people just kept coming out of the woodwork, like, yep, we'll rent your pasture. Yep, we'll take it. Yep, we'll take it. And so what for single animals, what we find to be the market right now is, so like, it's $1.30 per head per day. It's kind of what the going rate is. And you can charge that and people will jump at it. And for cow calf, you charge more because that's two animals. And the babies can be sometimes cantankerous, but for the most part, mom keeps them in line. Minimum of $1.50 per cow calf pair per head. I mean, per cow calf pair per day. But I have people charging $1.87 and they're getting it. And the numbers are now pretty good. So expense wise, look at the expense. Isn't much. They pay for the mineral, you pay for the water, the land, fixing, and you move them, you spend your time doing that. But moving animals, if you have a good setup, and I did it for 3 summers for a farm, and I'd set the timer just out of curiosity. How long does it really take if I just came and did my job? 10 minutes. But put on your boots and you take your time and you look things over and you listen to them eating. It's kind of fun. And look at the critters, look at the birds. Maybe 30 minutes. But so that's the expense. So, and I factored in there like fences are going to break, things you're going to have to replace. You got to pay for water. You got to pay for electricity. You got to pay your taxes. I put that in there and padded it some. And then if you look at the gross revenue, it's pretty low, right there. There isn't much there. Go ahead to the next one. If we do, and it ends up being profit margin about 94. It's pretty low. Look how much you get to keep. And so, in some of those, I was being conservative with how many animals you can put on, but like with really good management and you move often and you stay on top of it, the margins are definitely higher than this. But whether this is right exactly, I wouldn't get caught up in that so much. It's just that, look at the difference. So go to the next slide. So you really need to ask yourself why you're doing this. Why aren't you just fishing? You're retired, you got time, just fish. Or go hunt or go for a hike. Why do you do it? And so I do ask farmers this a lot. Well, it's a lifestyle. I get that answer a lot. I like to be in my own boss, just have more control. And then they plant corn. So let's say we plant corn. Let's just follow it through, just for fun. When you want to plant corn, can you save the seed? If you do, you're going to get fined and maybe thrown to jail, and people have. Those are patented seeds. You don't get to keep them. Back in the old days, you just kept a few kernels back, shucked them, planted them the following year, all is well. You can't do that anymore. So you have to go buy it, right? It's called agribusiness. Cargill, Monsanto, Archer Daniels, these big players, Syngenta, you buy it from them. So they charge you what they want. You don't get to set the price. They set the price. So once over, you've lost control, right? You just said you like being your own boss and you like having control. You've lost control right there. Well, the darn corn won't grow unless I fertilize it. Well, do you manufacture synthetic fertilizer on your farm? No. Syngenta, Monsanto, and they charge you whatever they want. You have no control over that. Twice over, you've lost control. Oh, and by the way, do you manufacture tractors and planters and all that? Nope. Again, the John Deere's, the Case IH, they're doing that. So you don't even have control over that. And then the weeds come. Gosh, what are we going to do with them? Well, we got to spray them, right? Because they're causing problems. Last time I checked, you're not making herbicides. Who's doing that? Archer Daniels, Santo, right? So 3 or 4 times over, you've lost control. And then, to make matters worse, when you go to harvest the corn, what do they do with it? It gets played with in the futures market. Like you have no control over the price. You don't set your price. So you've lost control again. Now, why do you farm? Right? Then you ask yourself, like, why am I farming? I thought it was for control and to be my own boss. You have the lifestyle, but you're kind of a slave to the system. In my opinion, like when 90% of the gross margin goes to our agribusiness people, good people, that's the system. It's just it's nothing against anybody who does it. It's not personal. That's just the system that we're under. And so like I think it's important to notice that. And so that when you go to grass, when you go to grazing, guess what? You have more of these things. You get to set your own price. You still get the lifestyle. It's quiet. And I think you'll enjoy it more. And you get to be your own boss. You can choose where you sell it, when you sell it, to whom you sell it, how much you sell it for. You have choices. Whereas in the commodities business, you don't have too many choices. So that is another reason, I think, to keep moving in this direction. And this, I love showing this because it really paints the picture well. So I'll just walk you through it. And what I love about it is like, I'm talking 90 years worth of data. So it's not some snapshot in time. And I show this a lot to farmers just to help them understand the game of farming. And once you know how the game is played, then it's up to you to choose what you want to do. But like back in the day, this is wealth in farming. About half of it farmers own. And obviously agribusiness is always going to have a little more. And so we just kind of kept up with that. Like if they lost some, well, farmers lost some and off they went together. What happens about 1942, 43, 44? Yeah, the war. Yep, the war ended and we figured out that like, oh, so this nitrous, we can use it to fertilize crops instead of blowing up people and buildings. Right? We can use it as a weapon to feed the world versus to destroy the world. Because what happens, farmers aren't making synthetic fertilizer, agribusinesses, and kind of off we went. And our farm policies changed too. But you can just see it separating big time. It was half. We're nowhere near here. And then of course the 80s, what happened, the farm crisis in the 80s just crashed. I mean, we're barely making it. A lot of farms foreclosed, lost their farm. And if we get down to about early 2000s, we had another downturn in the economy and farmers were in the negative. And yeah, it's a little higher now, but so they were in the negative. How are they doing? Pretty good. That's the game. So your job, I think farmer's job is to increase the green. It's a little bit play on words, but like increase your green, I would say. Get out of this. And I think as long as you play in the commodities market, in the corn and beans market, it's going to be hard to avoid this situation. But you can kind of get there somewhat with tilling and some other things that you can do. But like this is kind of the game. So why do I show this picture? Well, it's scary to make these moves. Like I don't like changing. No. I mean, most people don't like change. As much as we think, oh yeah, I can change, I can do it. No, we don't. You eat the same basic thing almost every day. You might change it up a little bit. You listen to the same basic things almost every day. You put your socks on the same almost every day. Just watch yourself. We're all creatures of habit. So change is hard. And I'm talking about putting on socks. We're talking about changing livelihoods and like getting rid of machinery and bringing animals on. That's a huge change, and that's your livelihood. And so you're not. That feels like jumping out of an airplane. It's scary, and I talk to people who have made the change. Well, I was kind of scared to make the move, and I didn't know if we could make it. As I ask after the fact, like, well, what got you going, or whatever. The finances a lot of times gets people going, but it was scary. But I have learned then that I need to be. Go ahead to the next one. It's scary when you're about to jump out. I was down in Florida on a spring break with the boys. My wife and I were, and I've always wanted to jump out of an airplane. When I was in college, we had it all set up with my wingmates, and the weather got bad and we couldn't go, and I never came back to it. 26 years later, I got to do it. But right on the edge, that's scary, and that's where we get a lot of our. I would just say, like, I guess I get. It's a lot like what our landowners and people who are thinking about changing go through. Like, oh man, I don't know. This is uncertain out here. Go ahead. But I want you to know that there are people like this guy in the funny hat. That would be us and Derek and the Rachels and Brooks of the world, who are there to jump out with you, who have been through the ropes and kind of know the process to keep going. And not just going to let you jump out alone. I think early in my career, I did that. Yep, go to Graziers. See you later. Busy going to the next, whatever it is I was doing. That doesn't, we are here. That's our job. And it works so much better when we play the role of that guy up there. We got your back, so to speak. And we'll kind of just guide you through. We free fell for quite a while, and then finally, it was pretty awesome. Okay. And my son decided he wanted to do it too. And we both made it okay. So life didn't want anything to do with it. So we'll keep going. And so, like, yeah, I'll just leave it to the kind of questions we have. That's really the gist of what I had to say.